Hi everyone, I'm Destiny Giles, and thank you for looking at my presentation and my case study. I'm excited to dive deeper into it. The case study I'm going to be reviewing is the 2016 mass shooting at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida. We're going to be exploring disaster management through a public health lens. So, getting started, I just wanted to give a little bit of context about the event and all that went down. So the event stretched around 4 hours of complete terror for the victims and everyone involved. Um, I want to say that about 300 people gathered at the Pulse nightclub, and it's a very popular LGBTQ nightclub in Orlando, Florida. This was on June 12th, and this was right before 2 a.m. So it was Latin night, so it attracted a lot of people, more than usual than the club typically sees on a normal night. But around 2 a.m., the shooter, his name was Omar Mateen, he attacked the club with an AR-15 rifle, and he also had a handgun on him as well. But luckily, there was a security guard who was an off-duty Orlando PD officer, and he initially responded to Omar, and they ended up having a gunfight, and there was gunfire too as well at that point. But about 15 to 20 people became hostages after Omar took them to the bathroom to the back of the club to keep them there. And while that was happening, there were police officers trying to get people out of the dance floor, the lounges, and get them to safety too. But those people were still stuck there. And around 2 a.m., which was really pivotal, I think, was the shooting was announced on Twitter by the nightclub. So everyone knew what was happening and for people to stay away and to do not come to the club. So as we continue on throughout the night, they say there were the next few hours after that were kind of unclear of really what all took place, but the SWAT team did ended up arriving. Victims were taken to the hospital in police cars. They were calling 911, and they were also using social media like Twitter, for help too as well. And interesting enough, Mateen ended up calling 911 30 minutes after the attack, and he spoke to 911 and he spoke to a crisis negotiator too as well. And around 5 a.m., the SWAT team did ended up having to explode the club to break down the back walls where the bathroom were. The hostages were able to escape, but then also Mateen was able to escape too as well. And right before 6 a.m., Omar was pronounced dead. The SWAT did ended up shooting him. And then, unfortunately, around 10 a.m., the Orlando mayor did announce that 49 were pronounced dead and around 50 were wounded after the event at the club. So I just want to give a little trigger warning that this is body cam footage of the night at the club, but it just gives some insight of the terrors of it. So yeah, it was a very tragic night in Orlando that night too as well. So I just wanted to put a little picture of some of the victims. So moving on to key players of the event too as well from local to federal level. The local players were City of Orlando, Orange County, the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office, and other players too as well. From the state level, we have the Florida Department of Health, the Attorney General's Office, nonprofits. The American Red Cross played a huge role, the Victim Service Center of Central Florida, and other nonprofit organizations too. And on a federal level, Key players were the Department of Justice, the FBI were involved, and then U.S. immigration too as well, since Omar was an immigrant too. So looking at a public health response, um, there's this quote that I found in the reading that you guys can read that I think was essential in putting that in here. And there were two just key points I wanted to mention when it came to public information and warning, and then critical transportation and patient care. So with ESF number 8, um, I was thinking of potential emergency procedures for security and the staff at the nightclub. You know, if they had like hideout spots or lockdown rooms in case of an emergency or an active shooter, I'm sorry. Having warnings and information that the public could have while they are at a nightclub, I think would have been beneficial too as well. But when it came to critical transportation and patient care, I think they did a good job with the Orlando PD transporting patients and victims to the hospitals and triaging them too as well, at the same time of while trying to actively take down the shooter. So when it came to preparedness, a lot of the information is going to come from the after action report by the City of Orlando Office of Emergency Management. So there were a lot of key strengths I wanted to highlight. It was strong leadership from city and county mayors, the city EOC and emergency management, communication, and then social media too, like I mentioned. So diving deeper into communication, I wanted to touch on overall the communication was done really, really well when it came to operational communication, but then also the flow of information throughout the night. So, for instance, like the initial release of information from the nightclub via Twitter, um, was, I think, a great move on their part too. And also the Orlando's press secretary's email was released. So that way victims or people families of victims were able to email them if they had any questions, if they had any concerns too as well. And then staff members of the city were able to allocate those emails so that way they were answered promptly too. And there were press conferences that were by the Orlando mayor, the FBI, the police chiefs, um, and it just allowed for clear messaging to the public. And there was a web page that was released by the city with all accurate information that were public records too. Also to the JIC coordinated information and all communication to the staff from different response and recovery locations too. And that was great communication operationally. And there was a call center that was located inside the city's EOC, and this helpline was created during the event so that way they can get calls from people missing persons information, and there are IT employees there to help the helpline if there was anything like backing it up or any tech issues too as well. And after the event, the call center ended up transforming into like a resource hotline for people to utilize after the fact. So moving on to resilience, I wanted to mention a slogan that came out of the whole event. And it really does highlight how resilient the Orlando community was, specifically the LGBT community in Orlando, Florida. So the slogan was Orlando Strong, and it was developed to support the holistic spirit of the LGBTQ community after the Pulse attack. This kind of represented um, heroism and compassion that the community had experienced after the event, and it just really shows how resilient they were. And there was a study done about the community resilience, which I thought was really cool. So I just wanted to highlight some key elements that the study highlighted. So first was that the event was a hate crime towards the LGBTQ community, but the community as a whole grew stronger and became way more resilient. Language and cultural competence were critical piece in responding to the event. and that survivors experienced trauma up to 1 year after. And there was a need for long-term mental health services, like with any mass shooting too as well. So I thought that study was really well done. So I just wanted to put in some highlights that I read about it. Okay, moving on to lessons learned. Um, I found a lot of key lessons learned from different resources too as well. So I wanted to just highlight my favorite ones or the ones that I found the most interesting. So the first is that participants in the event, they kind of wanted more community planning and then culturally competent available services, like language translation services. For instance, like a lot of the announcements before, during, and after the attack, they were all in English, and a lot of the people there were Spanish speaking and also other languages too. So having those announcements, especially after and during, I think having different languages would be beneficial. And for preparedness, of course, better regulations of gun control and weapons in the state of Florida too. And then I found interesting was that they were developing a family assistance center plan. Essentially, it's a building that has a lot of different resources for immediate services, support for victims, families, for victims and their families, like healthcare, medical examiner services, or funeral services for after. And I think Orlando was in the process of doing that in 2018. So I'm not sure if this was developed, but that's something that came out of it. So more lessons learned, and this is from the after action report. Um, they mentioned a couple of things like establishing a physical location for the JSE and public information officer to all be in one location. So maybe that was kind of a bit of a struggle during the event, but they realized in the future if this happened again, that would be beneficial too. And creating a donations management process services for goods and services to help out victims and families. And since this event was kind of complex with, the SWAT team coming in and having to talk to the shooter and other complex issues too as well, they mentioned that a legal team that could be there to represent in the EOC for consultations for quick decision making is something that they would do in the future. So some changes too. So thinking about the Family Assistance Center that mentioned from a public health lens, so having this committee team to be developed after the event is going to help with mental health and community resilience afterwards. And this helps reduce long-term consequences after an event like that too in the future. Um, the after action report mentioned that they were going to have some changes with liaison positions being opening up for better communication between response and recovery locations. And then coming from like in a EMS 911 standpoint too, the Orlando PD kind of having more protocols when it comes to active shooters in all circumstances because there were some points during the event that they were unsure what to do. And then crisis or critical incident stress management. That was implemented for debriefing of the event for after the fact for affected personnel, and it provided counseling services. And this can be for ongoing events too as well. Here are my references from my presentation, but I thank you guys for listening, and I hope you learned a lot from this too, from an emergency preparedness standpoint. And I can't wait to listen to all the other presentations. Thank you.